The stagecoach rattled like a tin kettle down the endless ribbon of dirt road, each jolt threatening to toss Clara, May Whitford's worn bonnet, from her head. She gripped the thin leather strap above her seat, the only steady thing in this swaying wooden box, and kept her other hand pressed to the folded letter in her lap. The ink on it was faded now, smudged at the corners from her thumb's constant touch, but the words were burned into her mind. I long to meet you, Miss Whitford. I believe we could be very happy together. Jeremiah Haskins' handwriting had been stiff, almost formal, but there had been a warmth in the way he signed his name. In the cold of her small Missouri room months ago, those letters had glowed with promise. They had been a doorway out of loneliness, a future where she would no longer eat at a silent table, no longer wake, to an empty house echoing with the absence of her parents. The coach lurched to one side, pulling her back into the present. Across from her, a miner in a dust-crusted hat snored loudly, his boots caked with the red clay of the territories. Beside him, a woman with a swaddled infant avoided Clara's gaze entirely. That was nothing new. People had been glancing away from her most of her life, as if looking too long might obligate them to speak, or worse, to see her. She had never been delicate. Strong arms from years of farm work, hips her aunt once whispered were childbearing wide. In Missouri, those things had made her useful. In the world of courtship, they had made her invisible. Except to Jeremiah. Or so she'd thought. The coach driver called out over the clatter of wheels, "Bear Creek. Bear Creek, last stop before sundown." Clara's heart thudded against her ribs. She smoothed her dress, pale blue, mended twice, and tried to gather herself into the image of a bride worth meeting. The town appeared in the distance, a scatter of false front buildings against the endless gold of prairie grass. The scent of cattle mingled with the sharper tang of horses and wood smoke. People milled along the main street, their eyes turning toward the incoming stagecoach, like prairie dogs lifting their heads at a rustle in the grass. When the coach stopped, the door swung open with a creak. Clara stepped down, clutching her carpet bag, searching the crowd for a man who might be Jeremiah. She saw him, tallish, sandy-haired, dressed in a decent waistcoat that spoke of careful saving. His eyes found her, and in the first instant there was recognition. The second instant, something else slid into them, a narrowing, a stiffening, as if he'd just bitten into a lemon. "Miss Whitford?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes, Mr. Haskins," she managed, forcing a smile she hoped would make up for whatever he'd just seen. He didn't take her hand. You're not what I expected." The words landed like stones in her chest. Around them, people had begun to slow their steps, heads angling toward the exchange. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, her voice tightening. He shook his head, half laughing without humor. "The agency didn't mention your size. I'm sorry, but this won't do." The air went still. A pair of boys on the porch of the general store stopped tossing their ball. The woman with the infant from the coach stood frozen in the doorway of the hotel, eyes darting between them. Clara felt the blood rush to her cheeks, her fingers tightening around her carpet bag until her knuckles ached. She wanted to say something, to remind him of the letters, of the promises, but her voice was locked behind a wall of humiliation. "I came all this way," she began, but the words wavered. Jeremiah stepped back as if to create more space between them. "It's best we part ways here. Good day to you, Miss Whitford." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the street, like a misplaced package no one wanted to claim. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, a blend of pity and amusement that made her throat burn. Before she could retreat, a shadow fell across her. "You'll pardon me, miss," a deep voice said, "but I believe you've been left without a place to go." She turned to see a man, taller than Jeremiah by a head, broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat, a weather that pulled low over eyes the color of winter sky. His face was tanned and lined, not unkindly, but with the marks of sun, wind, and years of hard living. "I'm Elias Rourke," he said, tipping his hat. "I've got a ranch just outside town. If you'd like a ride somewhere more private, I can offer it." She blinked, suspicion and gratitude warring in her mind. I don't know you." "That's true," he said evenly. "But you've just been treated poorly in front of half the town, and standing here isn't making it better." My offers for a seat in my wagon. Nothing more. His voice held no mockery, no sly undertone. Just a calm steadiness that made her want to believe him. Around them, the crowd was already losing interest, drifting back to their errands now that the spectacle was over. Clara took a slow breath. All right. Thank you. He nodded once and led her toward a waiting buckboard hitched to two bay geldings. He helped her up without comment on her weight, his hand firm but not lingering. When he climbed onto the bench beside her, he flicked the reins, and the horses started forward at an easy pace out of town. They rode in silence for a while, the road stretching ahead through tall prairie grass that swayed like the surface of a golden sea. The sun was beginning to dip, staining the horizon in streaks of orange and rose. "Did you know him?" she asked at last, her voice small. "Jeremiah Haskins." Elias kept his gaze forward. "I know of him. Enough to know you're better off without him." She wanted to argue, to say that without him she had nothing, no husband, no home in this territory, but the word stuck. Elias glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "I've seen that look before. I know what it's like to be weighed and found lacking in someone else's eyes." The wagon wheels creaked over the ruts in the road. She wondered what he meant, but didn't ask. Not yet. As the light faded, the outline of a ranch house appeared in the distance. Wide porch, barn beyond, smoke curling from the chimney. For the first time since stepping off the coach, Clara felt her lungs fill without the weight of humiliation pressing against them. She still didn't know who this man was, or why he'd helped her, but the road behind them was gone, and ahead lay something new. And for the first time in days, that didn't terrify her. The buckboard jolted as its wheels dipped into a shallow rut, waking Clara from the daze she'd fallen into. The wind had turned cool now, carrying with it the scent of hay and wood smoke. Shadows stretched long over the prairie, the sky a watercolor of fading gold and indigo. Elias Rourke handled the reins, with an ease born of years behind them. His gloved hands moved little, but the horses obeyed every subtle twitch. The man didn't speak much, not idle chatter at least, and Clara found herself oddly grateful for that. Silence was easier than trying to make conversation with a stranger whose kindness she couldn't yet understand. When the ranch came into full view, it was larger than she'd expected. A weathered two-story house with whitewashed trim, a wide porch lined with sturdy rocking chairs, and outbuildings scattered behind it. A barn, a corral, and a shed or two. The place wasn't new, but it breathed of steady care. Elias slowed the team near the porch. "You'll want to get down here," he said, climbing down first and offering her his hand. She hesitated. In Missouri, her size had made men either leer or look away, but Elias' gaze was steady, neither pitying nor appraising. She took his hand and stepped to the ground, her boots crunching on the packed dirt. From the porch, a woman emerged, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. She was middle-aged, with streaks of silver in her dark braid, and eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Brought home strays again, Elias?" she asked, her voice brisk but not unkind. "This is Miss Whitford," Elias said. "She's been put in a difficult spot. Thought she might rest here a while before deciding her next move." The woman's gaze swept over Clara, reading her in a heartbeat. The travel-worn dress, the carpet bag that was clearly all she owned, the weary slump she tried to hide. "I'm Mabel," she said, stepping forward and taking Clara's hand firmly. "And you're welcome here. Supper's nearly on." The words, simple, unadorned, struck something in Clara. It had been months since anyone had told her she was welcome anywhere. Inside, the house was warm with lamplight. The scent of stew mingled with fresh bread. Mabel ushered her to wash at a basin, then seated her at a heavy oak table that looked like it had been holding meals for decades. As they ate, Elias asked nothing of her past and told little of his own. Mabel did most of the talking, telling small stories of the ranch, of calves born in blizzards and fence lines mended after storms. Clara listened, letting the rhythm of their voices and the clink of cutlery fill the hollow places in her chest. After supper, Mabel showed her to a small upstairs room. It held a narrow bed, a quilt patched in cheerful colors, and a chest of drawers polished smooth from years of use. "It's not much," Mabel said, "but it's clean, and it's yours as long as you need. Clara managed to thank you, her throat thick. Alone at last, she sank onto the bed. Her hands still trembled from the day, from the long journey, the public rejection, and now this unexpected refuge. She unpinned her hair and brushed it out, the strands catching in the lamplight like chestnut silk. In the looking-glass on the dresser, she caught sight of her own face, rounder than fashion favored, cheeks still flushed from the humiliation in Bear Creek. Jeremiah's words replayed in her mind, sharp as glass. "You're not what I expected." She lay down, the quilt warm against her. Outside, a coyote yipped, answered by another farther off. She drifted to sleep, wondering why Elias Rourke, a man she'd never met, had cared enough to bring her here instead of leaving her to fend for herself. The next morning, the smell of coffee drew her downstairs. Elias was already outside, feeding the horses. Mabel poured her a cup. "He's out there before dawn most days," Mabel said, nodding toward the window. "Keeps the place running himself since—" She stopped, reconsidering, and busied herself with the coffee pot. Clara wondered what had happened but didn't pry. She knew enough of loss to recognize its shadow in other people. After breakfast, Clara found Elias near the barn, tightening the latch on a gate. "I should be on my way soon," she said, though the words felt hollow. She had no real way to go. "You've nowhere to be," Elias replied without looking up. "Stay a few days. Mabel could use an extra pair of hands." It was not a plea, but an offer, one she found herself accepting before she had time to think. The day passed in quiet work. Mabel set her to gathering eggs and helping with the washing, and by afternoon Clara's muscles ached in the familiar way they used to back on her parents' farm. She realized she liked the ache. It was proof she was useful. Late in the day, she carried a basket of eggs to the barn. Elias was inside, repairing a saddle. The late sun slanted through the open door, dust motes drifting in the golden light. "Not every man would have done what you did yesterday," she said, setting the basket down. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "And what did I do?" "You saw someone humiliated and gave them shelter." Elias leaned back on the stool. "A man's worth less than his boots if he can't offer help when it's needed. Besides," his gaze held hers for a moment, "I've been the one standing in the dust, with folks staring. It's not a good place to be." She didn't ask what had happened to him, not yet, but the weight in his voice told her it wasn't a small story. The wind outside picked up, rattling the barn doors. In the distance, clouds gathered low and dark over the horizon. Elias glanced toward them, his jaw tightening. "Storm coming," he said. "Could be a bad one." By dusk, the wind had turned sharp, whistling through the eaves. Mabel moved about the kitchen with quickened steps, securing shutters. Elias came in from the barn with his coat dusted in grit. "Best keep close tonight," he told Clara. "Out here, storms can tear a place apart." She nodded, but her pulse quickened. The house was sturdy, the company steady. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that this was only the first wind of something larger, something that might not be weathered so easily. The storm had rolled in with the kind of fury only the prairie could muster, a black wall of clouds devouring the horizon, the wind shrieking like some ancient thing set loose. Rain hammered the roof in relentless sheets, and each flash of lightning painted the room in stark white before plunging it back into shadow. Clara sat near the hearth, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. Across from her, Elias worked at mending a length of rope, his movements steady despite the roar outside. Mabel had retired upstairs early, leaving the two of them alone in the lamplight. The wind rattled the shutters hard enough to make the walls tremble. Clara flinched. Elias looked up, his eyes catching the flicker of fear on her face. "You've seen storms before," he said, not unkindly. "Not like this," she admitted. "Back in Missouri, they blew in quick but passed just as fast. This feels endless." He set the rope aside, leaning forward in his chair. "They don't last forever. Just feels that way when you're in the middle of them." His voice carried more weight than the words themselves. She studied him, the play of light and shadow across his face, the faint line between his brows that deepened when he thought too long on something. "What was it?" she asked quietly. That put you in the dust, the way you said you'd been before. Elias didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the fire, as though the flames might shape the words for him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. My wife, he said. Mary. She was carrying our first when she took sick. I brought in a doctor from 3 towns over, but it was no use. Lost them both before winter was through. Clara's fingers tightened around her mug. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I buried them on the hill east of here. He went on. After that, folks stopped asking when I'd remarry. Guess they figured I'd had my fill of hope. Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Clara knew something of loss, though hers had been slower, stretched over years, parents taken by fever, a home sold out from under her, the steady erosion of every dream she'd once dared to hold. The fire popped, sending up a small shower of sparks. She stared into it, gathering courage. I didn't just come west to marry, she said. I came because there was nothing left where I was. Folks said I was too much. Too big, too loud, too much of a burden for a man to carry. Elias' eyes fixed on hers. They were wrong. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples she couldn't quite name. She looked away first, afraid of what might be written in his face. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The prairie glistened under a washed-out sky, puddles gleaming in the ruts of the yard. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass. Elias was already outside, inspecting the damage. Clara stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight. Barn held up, he said when he spotted her. Lost a section of fence. I'll need to see to it before the cattle wander too far. She hesitated, then said, I can help. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing whether to refuse. Then he nodded. All right. Bring gloves if you've got them. They worked side by side in the damp morning, driving posts back into the softened ground, pulling wire taut. The mud sucked at her boots, but she found a steady rhythm, and Elias didn't hover or correct her, just handed her tools when she needed them, his presence steady as the earth underfoot. At one point, a sudden gust caught her skirt, tangling it around her legs. She laughed, a startled, unguarded sound she hadn't made in months. Elias glanced over, his mouth twitching toward a smile. You laugh like you mean it, he said. It's been a while, she replied. Something passed between them then, not the heated kind of thing she'd heard whispered about in boarding houses, but something quieter, more dangerous for being so real. By afternoon, the fence was mended. They walked back to the house together, boots caked with mud, the wind softer now. Inside, Mabel had stew simmering. She eyed them both with an expression that said she saw more than she let on. You'll want to eat before you fall over, she said, ladling out generous portions. Clara sat at the table, the ache in her arms a reminder of the work she'd done. Elias took the seat across from her, and for a time they ate in companionable quiet. Then Mabel said, as if casually, You'll be wanting to figure out where you're heading next, Clara. The spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She glanced at Elias, but he gave nothing away. I hadn't decided yet, she said slowly. Well, Mabel went on, a ranch is always better with another set of hands, and I suspect Elias hasn't minded the company. Elias set down his spoon. It's your choice, he said to Clara, his tone careful. But if you stay, you'll work. This isn't charity. I wouldn't have it any other way, she said before she could think. The smallest spark lit in his eyes. That night, Clara sat at the window of her small room, looking out at the moonlit prairie. The land stretched endlessly, quiet but alive. It was nothing like Missouri, and yet, for the first time since she'd boarded that train, she didn't feel like she was drifting untethered. Downstairs, she heard Elias moving about, boots on the floorboards, the creak of the porch step. She wondered if he ever truly rested, her thoughts tangled with questions she couldn't yet answer. What would it mean to stay? Could she be more than a guest here? Could she belong? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, she wanted to find out. Outside in the distance, a lone coyote howled. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the sound answer something in her. Spring came to the prairie like a cautious guest, the thaw slow, the grass timid in its return, the wind still carrying the bite of winter in its teeth. But the days grew longer, and Clara found herself moving through them with a steadiness she hadn't known she could possess. Her mornings were no longer uncertain. She rose before the sun, stoked the kitchen stove, fed the chickens, and set bread to rise while Elias worked in the barn. Sometimes he returned to find coffee waiting for him, steam curling like a ribbon in the dim light. They had slipped into a rhythm, not quite speaking of what it meant. And yet, in the small glances across the table, the shared laughter when a stubborn calf refused to be led, the quiet moments in the evening when they sat by the fire without needing words, something was taking root. But roots, Clara knew, were only as strong as the storms they could survive. One morning, a rider appeared on the horizon, his dark coat flapping in the wind. Elias spotted him first and stepped out onto the porch, shoulders tightening. Clara followed, wiping her hands on her apron. The man dismounted, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "I'm looking for a woman named Clara Bennett," he said. Her breath caught. "I'm Clara." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Letter came through the agency you signed with. From a man in Topeka. Says he'd still have you if you'd come." The words struck her like cold water. She hadn't thought of the agency in weeks, maybe months. That life, that desperation, felt like another person's. Elias' jaw was set, unreadable. The rider handed her the letter and mounted up again, disappearing as quickly as he'd come. Clara didn't open it. She stood with the paper trembling in her hand until Elias finally said, "You should read it." She shook her head. "I don't need to. Clara, I'm not going anywhere." The wind rattled the porch railing between them. Elias looked as if he wanted to say something, but instead, he turned and went back inside. That night, she lay awake, the letter still unopened on the table downstairs. She could feel the wall between them again, the same one they'd been carefully dismantling over the past weeks. It scared her how quickly it had rebuilt itself. In the morning, she found Elias at the corral, working a young horse. He didn't look up when she approached. "You think I'm still looking for a way out," she said. He kept his eyes on the horse, his voice even. "I think folks don't always know what they want until it's taken from them. And you think you'd just let me go?" His hand stilled on the rope. "If it's what you wanted. I've held on too hard before, and I lost more than I can tell you." Her chest tightened. "I'm not her, Elias. I'm not going to vanish on you." He finally met her gaze. There was no anger there, only the raw, unguarded pain of a man who'd buried too much already. A week passed. She kept working, kept showing up beside him in the fields, kept finding ways to fill the silences. Bit by bit, the wall cracked again. Then came the flood. Spring rain swelled the creek beyond its banks, threatening to wash out the bridge and drown half the pasture. Elias worked through the night, hauling boards, driving posts, shouting orders above the roar of the water. Clara stayed with him, mud streaking her skirts, rope burns on her hands. At one point, a rush of water caught Elias off balance, dragging him toward the edge. Clara lunged, gripping his arm with every ounce of strength she had. The current tore at them both, but she didn't let go until he was back on solid ground. When it was over, they stood chest-deep in water and mud, breathing hard. Elias looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his eyes. "You could have been swept under," he said hoarsely. "I wasn't," she answered, "because I was with you." The words hung there, heavy and certain, more binding than any paper contract she'd ever signed. When the waters receded and the damage was tallied, the ranch still stood. Fences could be rebuilt. Bridges could be mended. What matter had survived? That evening, Elias found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from washing. He stepped inside, mud still clinging to his boots. "You stayed," he said, as if the truth had only now fully landed. "I told you I would." He crossed the room in 3 strides. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with all the words left unsaid. Then he reached up, his hand brushing her cheek in a gesture both tender and tentative. "I don't have much to give," he said, "but what I have is yours, if you want it." She covered his hand with hers. "Elias, I didn't come here for much. I came for a place to belong." And I found it. In the days that followed, there was no grand announcement, no sudden change to their routine. They simply kept working together, as if they had always been meant to. But now, when Clara set bread on the table, Elias poured her coffee first. When she walked across the yard, his gaze followed until she disappeared from sight. And sometimes, in the quiet of evening, his hand would find hers under the table, rough and warm, and she'd hold on as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One night, as the sun sank in a blaze of gold and the prairie turned to shadow, Clara stood with Elias on the porch. The land stretched before them, endless and alive. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if we were meant to find each other?" He considered that for a long moment. "I don't know about meant, but I know I wouldn't trade the road that brought you here." She smiled, leaning into him, the wind tugging at her hair. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she lacked or what she'd lost. She was thinking about what she'd fought for and won. And in that wide, quiet land, with Elias' arm around her and the smell of rain in the air, Clara knew that love wasn't something given easily. It was something you built, post by post, fence by fence, storm by storm. The kind of love worth fighting for.